Good morning. It is Palm Sunday, and we are in the third week of our Easter sermon series called Gospel. The gospel is the good news of Jesus. And the overarching theme for this series is this: if the gospel you believe and live and speak and share isn't good news for everyone, then it is not the gospel of Jesus. If the brand of Christianity you're embracing is in any way unkind, unloving, uncaring, unhelpful, apathetic, overly critical, or harshly judgmental of people who are different than you, then it is not the gospel of Jesus. The gospel of Jesus is good news for everyone, not just for you or for people just like you, but for those who are different from you as well. The gospel of Jesus is good news for everyone, and that is the big idea of this sermon series. Now, in week number 1, we examined the calling of Levi the tax collector, and we learned that Jesus eats with sinners, that his heart is for the least and the lost. He's not for the righteous, he's for the sinner, and that's good news because we are all sinners. In week number 2, we discovered the parable of the workers in the vineyard, and we learned that Jesus welcomes latecomers, that any heavenly reward we receive from him comes by his grace, not by our goodness. And again, that's good news because Romans 3:10 says, no one is good. No, not one. And today we're going to discover that Jesus defies our expectations, that he's wholly different than what we think or what we imagine or what we expect or what we assume. He is infinitely bigger than our minds can comprehend, and that's good news too. Turns out our expectations of Jesus are too small, too biased, and too much like us. Too often when we look at Jesus, we're looking for confirmation, not for transformation. But he wants to draw us to him and transform us into his image. And that's good news because he is better than anything this world has to offer. Jesus defies our expectations in every way. And that's what we're going to see today. But first, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had something happen to you that was totally unexpected? Like something completely unforeseen. David Crowder had a song years ago called How He Loves, and there was this vivid lyric about Jesus, and it's been kind of written and rewritten several times, but it goes something like this: heaven meets earth like an unforeseen kiss, and my heart turns violently inside of my chest, and I don't have time to maintain these regrets when I think about the way that he loves. I wonder how many of you can relate with those lyrics. How many of you've ever experienced an unforeseen love or an unforeseen kiss? You know, I have been there, I have done that, and I fully know how that can turn your heart inside of your chest. When did it happen, you ask? Well, be patient. I was just about to tell you. So I was in 9th grade. And I was on a trip with my church youth group. Also, for all of you students and all of you parents, I just want you to know I'm reporting this story, not endorsing this story. Right? But it is a true story. You see, we were on a road trip to our church camp in Colorado. And we were driving from northeastern Oklahoma, and it was a 20-plus hour drive, and there were about 100 of us teenagers. And somehow, I ended up sitting next to this girl who I'd known for a year or two. And I can't really say I had a crush on her, although I did think she was cute, and that's probably why I sat next to her. But it was two to a seat, and we shared a seat on the bus, and we've been driving all day, and we've been chatting a bit between ourselves and between the other students around us and their seats too. And it's a church trip, and so we're singing songs all day long. And it's not just an all-day trip, but it's also an all-night drive. And we don't stop anywhere to stay the night. We just drive through the night. And so we are somewhere in the western plains of Kansas, and the sun has gone down, and it's dark. And we were all shoulder to shoulder in our seats, and we were swaying back and forth as we were singing worship songs, when all of the sudden I could have sworn this girl turned her head in my direction and kissed me. But I had never been kissed before, so I actually wasn't sure. So I immediately stopped swaying, and I immediately stopped singing, and I didn't say a word. And this might surprise some of you, but I was pretty unassuming when I was younger, and I was shocked. Like the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I got goosebumps and butterflies in my belly. And then I started questioning reality. Like, did that really happen? I mean, did the bus just hit a pothole and bump her into me? Like, she's not saying anything, and she's not even looking at me, and it's dark, and I didn't see her come and go, and I didn't know. It was so unexpected, such a surprising moment that I actually started questioning my memory. Like, maybe it didn't happen. Yeah, that's it. I think I imagined it. And after a few minutes, the goosebumps went away and my queasy stomach settled, and I talked myself into believing it was just an accident. It didn't really happen. And eventually I rejoined the singing and the swaying, and then it happened again. And this time it was forceful enough that I knew I didn't imagine it. And bam, I was in love for the very first time. It was an unforeseen kiss, quite a surprise, so very unexpected. Imagine my surprise the very next day when I said, well, I guess we're boyfriend and girlfriend now, right? And she said, no. And then I was not only surprised, I was a little bit heartbroken. But it was also very unexpected. How about you? Ever experienced anything so very unexpected? Maybe you experienced something really great and it was completely unexpected, or maybe you experienced something not so great, even something awful. It was totally unexpected. The unforeseen loss of a job, loss of a relationship, loss of a loved one. And this unexpected thing left you reeling. And the thing about expectations is we all have them. And when they're not met, it leaves us questioning everything. Well, today is Palm Sunday. It is the first day known as the Passion Week. This is the final week of Jesus' life, known as the Passion of the Christ. And it is the week when everyone, and I mean everyone, realized Jesus would defy all their expectations. And it's an interesting week because so much of what we see in the ministry of Jesus is what he is for. He's for turning the other cheek. He's for praying for your persecutors. He's for the tax collector and the sinner. He's for you. Romans 8:31 says, God is for us. Jesus is for you. The gospel is for you, and that is good news. I mean, if God is for us, then who can be against us? And that might surprise some of you, but God is for you. God is for you, and he's made you for him. But then the Passion Week comes along, the final week of Jesus' life, and we start to see some of the things that Jesus is against. And today I want to talk you through some of those things because some of them were totally unexpected. So Sunday, the first day of the Passion Week, is called Palm Sunday or the triumphal entry. And what we learn in the triumphal entry is that Jesus is against king and kingdom. He said his kingdom was not of this world. Or maybe we could say it like this. He is against leveraging political power to promote his agenda. Now that might surprise some of you, but read the Gospels. He had access to political power, but he didn't ever leverage it. So here's what's going on with Palm Sunday. Jesus enters Jerusalem to the adoring praise of perhaps hundreds of thousands of Jewish pilgrims. And these Jewish pilgrims, they've come to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And many of these pilgrims had followed Jesus just a few years earlier, back when they thought he might be the Messiah. They followed him, and they followed him in droves by the thousands, and especially when he performed public miracles for them, like the healing of the sick and the feeding of the hungry. But eventually, Jesus stopped doing many of those things for them because he knew, as Pastor Gary Cox likes to say, he knew they were chasing the blessing, not the blesser. And so Jesus stopped doing most all the stuff about halfway through his ministry. And then the masses stopped following him and the crowds disappeared, and Jesus focused mostly on discipling and preparing the 12. That is, until Jesus raised a well-known man from the dead days after the man died. And when Jesus raised the decaying Lazarus from the dead, news about it all spread quickly, and it was undeniable, and it was just days before the Passover, and the crowds came swarming back, and by the time Jesus reached Jerusalem, tens of thousands were waiting, and they ushered him into Jerusalem with all the pomp and circumstance of a new king, which was a slap in the face of the Roman-backed Jewish king Herod, and a slap in the face of the Roman Caesar as well. In fact, this may have been the very moment when the Romans knew they had to kill him. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Jesus already knows what's to come before he gets to Jerusalem. And so he sends a few disciples to prepare the way. And to prepare the way, he asks them to bring him a donkey to ride into Jerusalem, which is the capital city of Israel. And this ride into Jerusalem is significant because the crowds were coronating Jesus as king. And they were doing so because they believed Jesus would call them to arms to throw out the Romans. Their patriotism was at a fever pitch. When such things happen in history, the conquering king would ride into the capital city, ride rather than walk, but on a war horse as a symbol of victory and power. And Jesus doesn't ride into the city galloping on a war horse. Instead, he asks for a donkey, which is a symbol of peace. Again, he's defying their expectations. He's saying to the crowds, I'm not here for what you think I'm here for. Matthew 21, 6 through 11 says, the disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt, and they placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. And a very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches, palm branches, from the trees and spread them on the road. And the crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven. This word Hosanna means come, rescue, save us now. And when Jesus entered Jerusalem, it says the whole city was stirred. And they asked, who is this? And the crowds answered, this is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee. Now to come riding into Jerusalem, riding anything, whether horse or donkey, accepting the praise of such a large population would be a subversion of Roman authority. It wasn't allowed. In fact, it was sedition. And so in a way, Jesus was saying, I am against the empire. So you'd think, or at least they would have thought, he'd then ride this populous crowd all the way to the praetorium, to the headquarters of the Roman legions, and then tell his tens of thousands of followers to attack. But he didn't. In fact, they didn't go to the praetorium at all. They went to the Jewish temple instead. He didn't go after the Romans as they fully expected. He went after the Jews. He didn't go after their enemies. He went after them. Please don't miss this. He didn't go after the pagans. He went after the believers. He didn't go after the sinners. He went after those who considered themselves to be the chosen. And no one, I mean no one, expected this. This was completely unforeseen. Matthew 21, 12 through 15 says Jesus entered the temple courts and he drove out all who were buying and selling there, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. He said to them, "It is written, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers." And the blind and the lame, they came to him at the temple and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the teachers of the law saw the wonderful things he did, and the children shouting in the temple, "Hosanna to the Son of David," the chief priests and the teachers of the law were indignant. They were what? The religious leaders were what? The preachers were what? It says they were indignant. They were mad. They were angry. They were incensed. I mean, Jesus had just made it clear he wasn't on board with their politics, and now he's making it clear he's not on board with their religion either. I think I'd be mad. How about you? The Jewish religion practice in the first century was not, by the way, was not the same one given by Moses in the Old Testament. In fact, modern scholars recognize this and they give it an entirely different name. They call it Second Temple Judaism. Now, when Jesus spoke against the Jewish religion and the Jewish religious leaders, he wasn't speaking against the scriptures. He wasn't speaking against the law of Moses. He was speaking against Second Temple Judaism, which was a much evolved derivative of the law of Moses. But to our point today, the crowds expected Jesus to discredit the Roman occupation, and he really didn't do that. On the other hand, the crowds fully expected Jesus to validate their religious system, but he didn't do that either. Now, nobody knows what Jesus is going to do. Why? Because he defies their expectations just like he defies ours. They want him to do one thing, but he does something entirely different. So what do? Well, they send a contingent of scholars to sniff Jesus out. They want to know what he's all about, and so first they send the chief priests to question his theology. This is in Matthew 21, verses 23 through 27. They want to know what he believes about God because they aren't so sure. And then after that, they send the Pharisees, which was a more conservative political group, to question Jesus on taxes in Matthew 22, 15 through 22, because they want to know what he believes about the Roman occupancy, because again, they aren't so sure. And then they send the Sadducees, which is a more progressive political group, to question Jesus on marriage in Matthew 22, 23 through 33. And every time these groups question him and try to pin him down, he evades their questions brilliantly. And finally, they send the Pharisees one more time to question Jesus. And this last question is where I want to land today, because I think this is where the gospel of Jesus lands. It's where the heart of Jesus stands. Matthew 22, verses 34 through 40 says, hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. They got back together. And one of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest command? Which is the greatest command in the law? And Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commands. What is the greatest commandment in the law of Moses? I mean, they really want to know, because the only thing they really know for sure now is that Jesus doesn't stand for what they stand for. And they want to know what he stands for. And they also want to trap him in his words to find grounds to bring charges against him. And so they send their best and their brightest, and they ask him, which is the greatest commandment in the law of Moses? And this time he offers a not so surprising answer. The first and greatest command is to love God above and beyond anything and everything else with everything you have. Again, not a surprising answer. Like we all agree with that one, right? But then he offers a second answer they didn't ask for. And the second is like it. Jesus says, the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And that's a hard one. And it's just like the first one Jesus says. It's just as important. And this is a difficult one, especially in their context, because Second Temple Judaism had 613 religious rules they would use to determine who was in and who was out. 613. Now, they had another 2,000 minor rules they had to follow as well, but there were 613 rules you absolutely had to keep to be right with God in their religious system. It's kind of like Pastor Jimmy said last week about making things hard for outsiders coming to faith in Jesus. They were making it hard for outsiders to come to faith in God. Actually, they were making it hard for everyone to come to faith in God. They had to memorize and keep 613 religious rules perfectly. But here Jesus comes along and he says, now that's all wrong. There's only two rules. You love God and you love people. And that might be surprising for some of us, but it's true. The rules of Jesus distill down to two: love and love. And if you love well, that will cover everything else. 1 Peter 4:8 says, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. And if you've grown up in church hearing these verses over and over again, it might be hard to just grasp how surprising this simple set of rules would have been for them. Like, it was absolutely shocking to their senses. It made the hair on their necks stand up, and it turned their kosher stomachs. These Pharisees in the first century, they came up with 613 rules everyone had to follow. And if they didn't follow all 613 rules, then they could be excluded. They could be unneighborly toward them. And we kind of scoff at their 613 rules, but then we kind of make up our own list of rules to determine who's in and who's out, don't we? to determine who's acceptable and who's not, right? Like they gotta look like us, and they gotta act like us, and they gotta talk like us, and they gotta live like us, and sometimes they gotta be in the same economic class than us, and most certainly they gotta vote like us. And if they don't, they're kind of suspect. Like, are they even true Christians if they're not just like us? And I've just got to wonder, is it possible that we spend more time believing Jesus is just like us than we spend trying to be just like him? What's Jesus like? Surprise! He ain't like us. But we can be more like him. 1 John chapter 2, verses 6 through 9 says this: whoever claims to live in him must what? Live as Jesus did. Dear friends, John goes on to write, I'm not writing you a new command, but an old one, which you've heard since the beginning. This old command is the message you've heard. Oh, yes, I am writing you a new command. Its truth is seen in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. Anyone who claims to be in the light but hates his brother or sister is still in darkness. The old command John mentions, well, he's referring back to Jesus. The old command, love God and love your neighbor. The new command John is offering, live as Jesus lived. And we do that when we love. We love God and we don't hate people, and that's the gospel. And the gospel is surprisingly simple. Now, simply loving God doesn't mean we don't need to be transformed into his image. We do. And simply loving people doesn't mean we have to agree with every decision they ever make. We don't. But it does mean we do everything in love. The good news of the gospel is that God does everything in love. In love, God creates us and God sustains us. In love, God draws us to him. In love, God sent Jesus to us. In love, God shows us a better way through Jesus. In love, Jesus died the death we all deserve in our place. In love, God pursues the least and the lost and the sinner and the struggler. In love, God is both redeeming this world and preparing paradise for us. The good news of the gospel is that God does everything in love. And so heaven meets earth like an unforeseen kiss, and my heart turns violently inside of my chest, and I don't have time to maintain these regrets when I think about the way that he loves. Amen. Amen.